Alright, so let's go into this. Number of children living only with their mothers has doubled in past 50 years. And I'm going to scroll into the section that shows the racial differences between household dynamics in the United States. Dated 2020, here are the numbers. Starting with the non-black populations, Hispanic at 61.9%, white, non-Hispanic, 75.5%, and Asian, 87.4% of nuclear families and married households within their collective. My view of these marriage rates is it tells you a lot about the values of a collective and how it perceives itself, because when I look at high marriage rates, I think of a collective that is marriageable. Marriageability is the ability to be married across numbers. When I look at low marriage rates, I look at a collective that is unmarriageable because they're not married across massive numbers. And the only difference between unmarriageable and marriageable is the numbers. So the more you affirm those numbers, the more they're going to exist. It can't just wake up overnight and become that. They have to create at least a starting point and then let the other generations figure out how to continue to edify that starting point. But if you never start from somewhere, it just won't exist. It tells me that other collectives, when I look at these marriage rates, qualitatively insist on existing. Not just it's about the numbers for them. They want to ensure those numbers are healthily saturated, that those numbers are beneficial, that those numbers are meaningful. With us, it just seems like a factory of breeding, just random breeding, and obviously in broken homes. Considering broken homes have the highest rates of crime, mood disorders, and runaways, among all the issues that comes with that, for that to be the modern norm, for that to be the standard norm, is not convenient, it's not meaningful, and it doesn't benefit the collective at all. And someone can say that marriage doesn't benefit the collective, but neither does broken homes, so what is the benefit? Should we just all continue being scattered, disunited, not marrying on any level of sentience, not uniting on any level of sentience, or can we at least strive to having households and then compounding that on a scheme that makes it so that each household begins to merge on the global level, that each household begins to formulate the large-scale identity, but there has to be a number of households comprised of families? Because what else is the solution, or are there solutions? There has to be a solution if there's going to be a problem. And these low marriage rates and these broken communities, that's a pretty big problem. I believe that by observing other collectives, we can see that they have the solution within themselves, and they work together to create that. It's one thing to procreate. It's another thing to do it in broken homes. It's another thing to do it thinking that one parent is supposed to take care of their child or children. That doesn't make any sense. Two parents are part of its genetic value, and then one parent comes together. And speaking of that, one parent model cannot be sustaining an entire collective, because how does it merge the collective if it's a fragmentation of the collective? So you're replenishing the population through fragmentizing it at the same time. Whereas with marriage, you're replenishing the population by merging it at the same time. So if you're going to value the idea of offspring, you have to value the idea of the world around that offspring. An offspring being born into a vulnerable demographic where there are no solutions is detrimental to the quality of life of that person. An offspring being born into a monolith demographic where there are plenty of solutions, and going back to what I stated about how monolith doesn't mean identical, so that there are different factions within the monolith, so that the solution is whatever that different faction is. So that if there are constantly places of harm because there are different factions of identity, there are also places to combat that harm, places of refuge. But if there's nowhere to go because the entire group is demolished, then that creates an unsafe place for that offspring, or because that collective is vulnerable too. So where can they go to assess meaning? Where can anyone go to assess any kind of meaning if their whole group is chaotic and destructive, and then outside of themselves hated? At that point, you're just constantly having to be the exception when it's easier to create a rule. Well, that's all I have I hope that you enjoyed this discussion, but also are ruminating over the mentions that I've had. Ideally, we can create a collective, highly married, creating homes that are structured, that are intentional, two-parent, and constantly merging family groups. I hope we can create that kind of a world so that most of the households were married. Not a world where there's only 37% of married households, but where there was upwards up to 70%, 80%, 90%, 95% of married households. Or else we'll just keep doing the same thing we're doing, and that's going to consume you further into the abyss rather than benefit us. That stated, that is all I have. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for more.